Paper 1, question 3 is a question that really worries a lot of students. It's to do with structure. Now, there's a really simple way to answer this question that I'm going to show you. Just like question 2, you need to spend 10 minutes on this question and it's worth 8 marks. You're looking to do 3 small paragraphs. I'm going to show you exactly how to lay them out and how to maximise your potential to do really well in this tricky question. Let's have a look. If you haven't done so already, I advise pausing the video and reading the extract that's linked at the bottom of the video description. So I'll pause it and have a read because we're going to be working with the whole extract this time, rather than just the short extract that we did for question 2. So obviously in your paper you've done your question 1 multiple choice, your question 2 is your language analysis, then you get to question 3, and this is your first question where you're working with the whole of the source. So let's have a look at what we need to do. You now need to think about the source as a whole. So don't worry guys, the question paper will guide you through what you need to do. The text is from the beginning of the short story, so that can be relevant just in the sense that we know where it comes and what its intent and the writer's intention. You know, we know it's at the beginning of the short story, so they're going to have different intentions to a writer who's placing it at the end. Now they've changed this question and they've made it nicer. How has the writer structured the text to highlight a contrast, okay, between the experiences of the woman? So this is how we're going to frame our answer. Often it might be to create tension, to create suspense, but we're working with, highlighting a contrast. So how is the contrast made more or less evident by the end of the source? How the writer uses structure to create an effect, and the writer's use of any other structural features such as changes in mood, tone or perspective. So I'm going to highlight these just because there's something that we might come back to later on, and some other things we could talk about maybe if we're stuck for ideas. So like I said to you guys, this is a nice, easy question to structure, and I'm going to give you a way to approach this. So I think you want to go for 3 paragraphs for this one, but don't panic, they're going to be short. We're not writing in the detail that we're going to be that we were writing in for question 2, and there is also no language analysis. Okay, we are not analysing language. We're analysing structure. We're not looking for similes and metaphors. We're looking for structural techniques. And I know that sounds really tricky, but it's actually quite straightforward. And now they've changed the question so that we have something to look for, in this case contrast. It makes it easier. So the 3 paragraphs we're going to look for before we have a look at the source is the beginning or the opening. That's our para 1. Paragraph 2. Now it's easy to call this the middle, but it can also sort of mean focus shifts. I don't mean literally in the middle of the text. I mean where the text starts to change. In paragraph 3, we're going to talk about the ending. Now I like to view this as like a little graph. We're going to track whatever they ask us to track here. So in the past it's been suspense, tension. We're going to track the contrast. And we're going to see how does contrast is such a big thing in this text. We've seen that with question 2. How does the contrast shift and change, and how does it become evident as the text goes on from the beginning to the end? Okay, and we're going to lay it out in 3 nice neat paragraphs. So let's have a look at our extract. And again, you really do need to read this before you have a look, otherwise it's going to be tricky. So we know that the beginning, and again, question 1 and 2 will help you with this. You've just done your multiple choice on question 1. You've analysed question 2. So we know here, this is our opening, so this is going to be the nitty gritty for my paragraph 1, that Rosabelle is poor, hungry, sort of physically, but also emotionally she's feeling quite despondent, I'm going to say hopeless, frustrated. So it isn't the most positive opening, and I want to find a few quotes where I think the writer has intentionally made this really clear from the beginning. So we want to use, like our question 2, lots of nice short embedded quotations. So I'm going to go for "She had so little tea." So they tell us this really early on. So this establishes her difficult, or at least hints at, life. Also, she'd have sacrificed her soul for a good dinner. That really reinforces it there. And then we've got this bit that we've already talked about, and we could use a few quotes from here. As I'm going for Rosabel's situation, I think I'm going to find some that talk about her. So I'm going to go for her black greasy petticoat. The petticoat, by the way, is like the thing that women used to wear underneath a skirt. And I'm going to go for her feet were horribly wet. So I think there's lots of evidence here I can use to show that, you know, at the beginning of the text, the writer wants to make it pretty clear that Rosabel's got a difficult life, that she's not got it easy, that she's a working class girl. She's riding on the bus. And again, here we hear about the awful woman in the grey Macintosh. And the signs, again, the sort of woman who says, oh, I'll call in tomorrow and decide definitely. And Rosabel smiles to herself. So going back to my little plan, my opening, I think the writer establishes here. I'm going to say establishes Rosabel's difficult life. So that's going to be the sort of gist of my opening. Then back to the middle. We have a flashback here. These are nice when you get them because they're easy to talk about. So we flash back and have a sort of focus change at line 15 of the girls. And the pace slows down a bit here. So she goes through, pace is a clear structural feature you can talk about. She goes through all of the people she's seen quite quickly in this paragraph. But when we get here, there's more sort of zooming in on this woman that's happened. So there's a slowdown here. And there's a real obvious contrast in Rosabel's situation and this girl's situation. So we're going to use another colour for the middle. Now, this girl has a ribbon shot with gold. So that's a really clear contrast there between Rosabel's muddy petticoat. We've got the dialogue here as well, which is a structural feature. So Rosabel's sort of been quite lonely, I would say, up until here, riding on the bus on her own. But the introduction of dialogue, again, sort of highlights Rosabel's isolation. She says that everyone sort of resolves into a meaningless staring face. Sorry, where is it? Yeah, here. But then Rosabel's customer's got this sort of Harry fawning on her. She glances laughingly. Again, there's a real clear contrast there to Rosabel's half closed eyes here. So this is deliberate, guys. This is deliberate structure to put Rosabel and the girl side by side and show us the difference. She calls her madam. She runs up breathlessly. They have been very hard to please. So I'm going to say here, this deliberately contrasts with Rosabel's situation. Okay, and then I'm going to look at the ending. Again, I'm doing this in kind of quite slow time, guys. You wouldn't have time to do this much planning in the real thing. You're going to have to be a bit quicker, but I want to break it down for you. Rosabel turned to the mirror and placed it on her brown hair. So this really is like where their worlds collide, because Rosabel is getting an insight into the girl's world. She puts a hat on that she's obviously never going to be able to wear normally. It's for richer women. And the girl, again, we've got this dialogue, oh, Harry, isn't it adorable? So the placement, so I'm not analysing the words here, adorable. I'm talking about the placement. The placement of this word, adorable, highlights Rosabel's lack of hope. I would say it's almost, what's the word, patronising. She says, oh, isn't it adorable? It's kind of, sorry, my terrible writing here. And then we have contrast here, this sort of girl simpering over Rosabel, being a bit patronising, and then we've got the anger that sees Rosabel. So I'm using both colours here because I kind of feel like the contrast comes together here. So I'm going to say the worlds of both girls come close, but the emotions are strongly contrasted still. So Rosabel's angry. She's angry at the situation, she's angry at the world, but she manages to hide it. It's exquisitely finished off, madam, she said, and the girl swept out of her carriage and left Harry to pay and bring the box with him. I shall go straight home and put it on before I come to lunch with you. So this is a really key bit, guys, talking right about the ending, because this links back to the beginning in Rose's hunger. So although we've had this brief moment when their worlds are together, and Rosabel tries the hat on, and she for a second could be like the girl who's buying the hat, but actually this Harry sort of bustling out afterwards, carrying the box after picking up the bill and then saying, well, they're going to go out to lunch, we're reminded of Rosabel's hunger. She's left isolated, she's left alone, and we cycle back to the beginning. So we sort of come full circle and we're reminded through this really clear use of contrast about Rosabel's situation. So back to my plan. This establishes Rosabel's difficult life. In paragraph 2, it's starkly contrasted with rich customer. This is just my sort of very little plan that's not particularly detailed, but that's all you need. And then ending, I'm going to say, worlds mix, but still reminded of a real divide between the two. Okay, and now I'm going to show you how to set this out as a very straightforward 3-paragraph answer. I'm not going to handwrite it, I'm going to show you it typed because my handwriting is difficult to read. The writer establishes Rosabel's difficult situation almost immediately in the opening of the text, in order to contrast this later with the customer in the hat shop. The use of the phrase, "had so little tea," and "sacrificed her soul for a good dinner" in the exposition of the story highlight the difficult nature of her life, and prepares us to find the stark contrast with the customer even more jarring. It is also likely to evoke sympathy for Rosabel. So all I've done in my first paragraph is try to establish what the writer is doing at the start and why I think they've done it. So they've tried to show how difficult Rosabel's life is to evoke sympathy, and it's to set up later for this really stark contrast between the lives of the two characters. I've also embedded some quotes along the way. Next, I've got my second paragraph with the focus shift. The writer then introduces the character of the other girl in order to reinforce the contrast between how Rosabel lives and how some of her customers do. The pace slows here to describe the ribbon shot with gold, reminds the reader uncomfortably of Rosabel's petticoat and the black greasy mud from earlier. The dialogue between the girl and Harry further serves to isolate Rosabel from their life, as they only address her to give commands. "You must have a black hat," while Rosabel runs around breathlessly, contrasting with the girl who is glancing laughingly at Rosabel. So I have mentioned some structural methods here, even though they don't seem obvious. Of course, we've got the contrast again. I've talked about pace and how that slows down. I've got the link between the ribbon shot with gold and the black greasy mud from earlier. There's dialogue as well, which is a structural feature, and then the contrast of breathlessly and laughingly as well. Now, I'm not zooming in and analysing these words, but I'm mentioning that the placement of them is deliberate because it helps to reinforce that divide and that isolation that Rosabel feels in the presence of these sort of people who are just people that she cannot relate to and also equally cannot relate to her. The extract ends with Rosabel being offered a brief glimpse into the girl's world before it is pulled away again and the divide is as apparent as ever. "Let me see how it looks on you," the girl asks, before Rosabel puts the hat on for the young couple. While the girls find this patronisingly adorable, Rosabel's emotions contrast plainly as a feeling of anger seized Rosabel. The flashback ends with a reminder of Rosabel's initial hunger and desperation, as the girl casually mentions lunch with Harry. The extract ending like this serves to emphasise the different worlds of the girl and Rosabel, a world Rosabel will seemingly never enter. So I finished by talking about the ending and, most importantly, why I think the writer chose to end it like this. Always look for links or hints back to the beginning of the text, because you'll often find them. I think the most important thing with this question is to track the thing they've asked you to talk about. So if it's tension, think of it as a graph. How does the tension rise and fall? How does the suspense rise and fall? Here it's a bit different because I've been tracking the contrast and how it sort of starts as a wide chasm, then it sort of closes a bit towards the end, but then it's as vast as ever towards the end. So I would almost suggest drawing a little graph in your planning notes or by the sides of the extract, tracking how that thing changes from the beginning to the end. It might be, for example, that the tension stays quite tight for a while and then it drops. It might be that it builds and builds and builds and then it drops right down just right at the end. So track whatever it is that they've asked you to write about. So there you go. Question 3 isn't as tricky as it seems if you use this formula. Now don't forget to only spend 10 minutes on question 2 and 3. You want to leave plenty of time for question 4 and plenty of time for question 5, where you can really maximise those marks. Have a look at my next videos to see how to do really well in those too.